Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Finovate podcast. We've got a fun one for you today. Joining me, we have Brett King. You may know him from his book, Bank 4.0. You may know him from Breaking Banks podcast. You may know him from Movin'. Today, he is making the leap into full-on futurist, and we're going to be talking about a new book that Brett's got coming out called Technosocialism. Brett, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Greg. It's great to be back on.
So, the new book, I was looking through some of the materials you sent over, and it looks just extremely ambitious. Can you talk a little bit about technosocialism and what sort of the thesis of the book is? And we'll dive in a little bit more at that point.
Yeah. So, back in 2015, I wrote a book called Augmented: Life in the Smart Lane, which sort of tackled how we would adapt to this world of, or highly automated world and lots of technology. But what I didn't do is work out really, how this would affect governance and society and, organizing principles around, economics and so forth. And so I wanted to tackle that. But it came from really a position of this increasing economic uncertainty. So we have the pandemic that's obviously generated a lot of concern. But even prior to that, the US right now is in a period of great inequality, as are some other economies around the world. Then you lay on top of that the impact of artificial intelligence on employment, and then the impact of climate change, and you really sort of ratchet up this economic uncertainty. So I wanted to figure out how we as societies are going to sort of get through this period, this contentious period. So that was the birth of what we now call the rise of technosocialism.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really amazing. There's a lot of topics that you cover, things like healthcare, like government. One of the ones that I wanted to talk about, just given everything that's happening right now, we're recording this while the COP26 is going on. And one of the places you do talk about is your environmental impact. Can we start there and just look at what changes are going to come from that and sort of how you address that in your book?
Sure. The biggest problem we've got with the climate is we know now what's coming. There's debate over how intense it's going to be in certain areas, how big sea rise is going to be, and so forth. But we a lot of it's really sort of baked in. So when you think about why it is that we haven't sort of been able to tackle this and get agreement on this, part of the core problem is that we tend to be quite short-term focused in our planning as a species. We're focused on the next quarter, the next year in terms of financial reporting, or maybe, the next 2 years or 4 years in terms of political cycles. But when it comes to planning out things for 20 years in our future or 30 years in our future, the big problem is we just ask who's going to pay for it. And the problem with that type of issue in terms of very short-term focused planning is we're not committing enough funds or enough resources to these longer-term problems. So they tend to be worse when they hit us, because people are saying, well, we don't even know if it's true yet, so let's see what happens. But by the time it happens, it's too late. So part of this was how are we going to adapt to a world with these changes, and where are we going to fund these massive projects globally? So, for example, we talk about 570 cities by 2050 inundated with sea level rise, or 100-year flooding levels, displacing between 300 million and 1 billion people as eco-refugees. Now, this scale is almost unimaginable in terms of this problem. And so if we wait until 2050 to do something about it, then obviously it's going to be far worse. But then how do you create a global program of climate resilience and infrastructure and building support mechanisms for eco-refugees, and how do you change your views on, and policies on immigration? So we dive into a lot of those things in terms of what could be some of the potential ways that we'll tackle that. But these are, at the heart of it, very philosophical questions. It really gets to the heart of, what is humanity? What's our purpose on this planet? And, how can we better work together to solve this problem? And that's really the core outcome of the book, is that the best outcome is when humans as a species, will collaborate together. That's really what we call optimal humanity.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly the size of the challenge is immense. And I think, you maybe give people more credit than I do in terms of being able to look further upstream. 2 years, 4 years out, that almost sounds like a pipe dream.
Yeah.
Sometimes, because whatever social media scandal is going to envelop us next week. But you're absolutely spot on. And I think here's where you can see kind of the scope of the book and the project that you've undertaken. I think another one that you highlight here is kind of the future of unemployment, because of the sheer number of jobs that are going to go away because of artificial intelligence. There's going to be robots that can come in and do things more efficiently. And so this creates this same kind of massive question where you've got a huge portion of the population. The magnitude of the problem is really difficult to understand. But to your earlier point, the more we can look forward and kind of anticipate this, the better it will be for everybody. Can you talk a little bit about that sort of sustained unemployment piece, though, and dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, a lot of people argue that they don't think it's going to be as bad as, what it's predicted, that the internet created new jobs when it came along. But, artificial intelligence or highly automated societies is more akin to like the Industrial Revolution in terms of its impact on society, rather than, like the internet. And so you've got a situation in the short term where you're going to have both labor shortages from lack of skilled, technology workers in the various fields. Plus, you're going to have displacement of people because of the fact that their jobs have been replaced by robots. Now, this is going to create this gap. And so how do you fill that gap where people are now displaced because, you're in a highly automated society, so part of it is you could do additional training and get them onto new skills, but is there going to be enough jobs for humans, enough hours to be worked in the future? The goal of automation is to automate humans out of, the working situation. And the market is heavily incentivized for technology companies that deploy automation because it results in greater profits. The largest, 9 out of 10 of the largest companies on the stock exchange globally now are technology companies. So we know the market really, gives big support to these entities that don't need as many people employed as they did in the old days. The days of the industrial blue chips in the 1950s and 60s, as an example. So it's a philosophical change as to how we work. That work is no longer the mechanism that puts food on the table. So this raises the issue of things like universal basic income and other mechanisms you might use as a social safety net for those that have been displaced by technology. How do you pay for that? Well, the wealth that's generated by artificial intelligence, as an example, might be one way. Taxing robots or algorithms might be another way. And then putting pressure on corporations to create job transfer programs and things like that. But then on the flip side, you have this massive requirement to mobilize around climate change,
Mm-hmm.
building seawalls for defenses of cities so they don't get inundated with floodwaters, building new cities, placements for the eco-refugees. There's tons, carbon sequestration technology, building these technologies around the world to extract carbon from the atmosphere. We are talking about a new industry that's going to, develop over the next 50 years or so, and it's going to be one of the biggest employers on the planet. But then we have to think about new paradigms of how we're going to pay for that. So one of the things we promote in the book, as an example, is if you want universal basic income, you have to do like a national service, maybe 2 years of national service, which is focused on climate resilience, or something like that, to be able to qualify for that in the future. But overall, it sort of seems like UBI is a pretty much guaranteed outcome for humanity. And the good news of that is, when you work in the future, the work that you do or our children do is going to be work that they're really passionate about, not work that has to put food on the table, because the economy will be reprioritized, where the main goals of economies around the world will be to cater for the needs of their citizens first and foremost, and the profits and growth and economic growth secondly. Because right now today, what we have is, if you want to sort of measure the success of economies, economists use measures like GDP growth and stock market prices and things like this. But the other measure, of course, is, can the economy support the basic needs of its citizens? Can it house everybody? Can it give them healthcare, education, enough food to eat, enough clothes on their back? And if the economy can't provide those things for every citizen, you could rightly argue the economy's failed. So in the situation where we have high inequality in the US today, you've got the most successful economy the world's ever seen in respect to economic metrics, but in respect to inequality, then this is the greatest inequality of any modern nation at any time in modern history that we see in the United States, the gap between the rich and the poor. So you can't argue that the economy is being effective for every citizen. So that rebalancing of economic output for the needs of the citizens first and foremost, and then the economy at large secondly, is part of sort of the reframing of the role of economics and sort of reform of capitalism that we talk about in the book.
Yeah. I mean, I think you start to see where the phrase technosocialism comes from as you listen to this answer. And I think it's really clear that the economy is not working for everybody at the moment. And there are some significant red flags and some really clear indicators that we can't carry on as we have done, despite what some of our political leaders might think, that it's time, the change is coming. There's no way to avoid it. And the only answer is to make sure you change in the right way. And this actually brings me to one of the pieces that I found really interesting in the book, the kind of 4 possible timelines that you laid out, these kind of 4 options based on where we fall on this grid of whether it's a chaotic future versus a planned future, whether we're more inclusive and collective or more exclusionary and divided. And there are some, potentially troubling quadrants on this possible timeline. Of course, there's some good ones as well, but can you talk through that? And that'll probably be, the amount we have time for today, but I think that'll be an excellent teaser for what the book was all about.
Yeah, so you got it right. The quadrants are inclusive or collective versus exclusionary or individualistic, and chaotic versus planned. That's the quadrant. And so in the upper right-hand corner, where you have a planned society that's highly inclusive, you have technosocialism. And we argue that that's going to have to be the philosophical evolution of humanity. Optimal humanity is when we're, humans are our best when we work together. That's the argument, right? Then you've got on the other side, you've got on the planned but exclusionary side, you've got what we call neo-feudalism, which is where the inequality that we have in the world today is sort of baked in. Then on the chaotic end, you've got 2 scenarios. One where there's a large sort of a rejection of technology and science writ large because of AI and its effects. And so we called that the sort of Luddistan scenario, and failed states where we just wait too long to do anything. So it's chaotic and exclusionary because we just we don't have a plan. And so the failed states could be stimulated, for example, if China decided to overtake Taiwan, and at the same time China was becoming the world's #1 economy, and the US pushed back on that, that could distract us from the larger mission of climate, as an example. Neo-feudalism is the one concern, I think, is sort of the more realistic alternative to technosocialism, where we get this inequality baked in, and the technology, for example, longevity treatments, where you get to live longer, or gene therapy. These are only available to the richest, parts of society, and so you have this stratification that comes between humanity. That's a real concern, and that's where we don't modify the existing sort of view of capitalism. But all of those quadrants, where it sort of comes together is really this question of well, how are we going to respond to this economic pressure, this economic uncertainty that's happening? And I refer to Will and Ariel Durant in the book, their book Lessons from History, which sort of basically shows that if in previous times throughout history, when we've seen this level of inequality, you either have, legislated redistribution of wealth, or you have revolution. And we're already, at a point where, as I point out at the start of the book, that protests have increased 1,000% in participation in the last 20 years across the planet, because people are expressing their concerns about this economic uncertainty. So the pressure on us to really plan out the future and solve these problems has never really been more acute.
Well, and certainly I think one of the things that's both terrifying and potentially optimistic is that the potential outcomes which you list out all seem possible, or you could imagine any one of them coming to pass. And I think this is the area where you need to really take a good hard look at things and say, well, which outcome is preferable? How do we get to that preferable outcome? And there are certainly some large scale shifts that need to be made, and some, as the book points out, that will be made automatically, some that aren't optional, some that are going to come for us whether we want them or not.
Yeah, that's exactly the debate we wanted to have. It's like, okay, if you don't like what I've proposed, if you don't like this, collective approach to humanity that shrinks government through automation and is able to provide, universal healthcare and universal education at a very lower cost than what we have today, as an example. If you don't like that model because it sounds like socialism to you, then here are the other models that are most likely. Which of those would you choose? And
right.
And ultimately, that's the sort of conversation we have to have, is like, if we're not going to change the system, if you think this is the best system that humanity is ever going to come up with, what we have today, then let's play that out. And let's, as a society, let's have the conversation about which way we want this to go, and, really honestly assess, where humanity is going to go in the future. And these things that are going to happen, the ongoing inequality, the impact of AI, highly automated societies, and the impact of climate are going to have to make us philosophically think about what it is to be human and what it is to be a species on this planet, and how we should be working together. That's ultimately, why we wrote the book.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. And so again, the book is called The Rise of Technosocialism, and it will be available coming up here later on in November. My copy is already on order. I would encourage anybody who's listening to go out and grab a copy themselves. Should be just a fascinating read, and hopefully it spurs some really engaging conversations among people who need to have these conversations. And I think a lot of folks in this fintech community are in positions to affect the outcome in ways that maybe aren't relevant or aren't readily apparent, I should say, to them at the moment. And this is, I think, where we need to all be thinking. We need to be concentrating our thoughts on what can I do? How can I help bring our race, our society to the desired outcome here? Because there really are some very big potential decisions coming for us as a society that we need to be ready to make these decisions. And it's good for all of us in whatever positions we have, whatever power we have, to be able to make a stand, to be able to do something that you think will benefit the larger group, that will benefit society. So I can't wait for it to come out. Again, we're chatting with Brett King. And Brett, thank you again for joining me. It sounds just like a fascinating project.
Greg, it's always good to catch up. Hopefully we'll get to see each other in person sometime soon, but thank you for the support. And if you want to find out a bit more about the book, go to www.riseoftechnosocialism.com or technosocialism.com, and you'll find a trailer there and more information about the contents. But thanks again for the opportunity to chat.
Yeah, my pleasure.
The Finovate podcast is produced by Informa Connect in association with Provoke.fm Media. Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.